Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure my volume is okay. Always check your sound. Hope everyone is doing okay on this Saturday. I did shows early this morning, and I'm going to get a few in this evening while I'm not doing anything else. So, one of the interesting shows that I was turned on to by one of my subscribers. Thank you very much. You know who you are. You sent me the story. I can't remember your name. I'm sorry. Damn, I can't remember your name. And if I'm not on my Twitter page, I have another story queued up on Twitter. Nevertheless, thank you very much. So one of the things we postulated, I think last time we talked about this, was you're essentially taking people's kids away from them. And taking those kids away from them and putting those kids in a separate place, how do you ensure that those kids are safe? Now, here's one of the catch. There are two things. One, this. U.S. admits it lost 1,500 immigrant children, handed many of them directly to human traffickers. Think about that. They lost track of 1,500 kids. Now, we've just taken over 2,000 kids away from these parents, and Trump doesn't have any way of getting these kids back to their parents up to this point. Now, one of the catch, however, one of the immigrant workers that we know of people who are working for one of these companies, because, you know, these companies are doing gangbusters. Donald Trump has done this separations, is putting people in family with his zero tolerance policies. I mean, putting people in camps. So you can imagine the camps themselves and the owners of those camps are doing magnificently well with this particular president, putting these people in for-profit presidents. The last president started the process under Obama and these new third-way Democrats. Trump upped the ante. One of the agents that was working at one of these camps for boys, for children, ends up being caught with a huge cache of child porn on his computer. Thing is, he was working for the camp after they caught him with the child porn, meaning he was working as a cop before he gets caught under this kind of investigation. After they have this kind of he ends up having, I guess, a salacious conversation with somebody in the chat room. That person ends up being an undercover cop. He gets turned in. He quits immediately. The case goes up, but it never reaches the trial. The case is dropped. However, he still gets, if I'm not mistaken, a record, or it really says a record of the fact that he was essentially put up on charges for child porn. He starts working for boys from, I think it's like 12 to 17 or something to that effect, but it's essentially he started working in one of the shelters for migrant young boys. This guy, again, gets busted for a cache of child porn. Apparently, he had it for up to 2 years. And the conversation he had with somebody on one of the chat rooms was enough to get him put up on charges. Tell me you can understand that this is a recipe for disaster. Not only have you separated people away from their kids, you haven't even ensured that these kids are safe based on the custodians that you've left them with. This guy was a walking time bomb. Let's take a look at the story. The story is terrifying because do you honestly believe that this guy is the only one? I suspect he is not. Not to mention, like I say, we handed these kids off to, in some cases, human traffickers. A Border Patrol agent who was arrested on child pornography charges was given direct access to children when he was hired by an immigration shelter, according to reports detailing the conditions thousands of immigrant children are subjected to when they are separated from their parents and then detained in shelters across the country. Ernesto Padron worked as a United States Border Patrol agent for 13 years up until he was arrested on second-degree felony charges for possession and promotion of child pornography. Padron first landed on the FBI's radar in 2008 when he engaged in a conversation with an undercover agent in an online chat room. He was eventually arrested by the Cameron County Sheriff's Department and charged in 2010, and he immediately resigned from Border Patrol. Padron's home was raided and his laptop and desktop computers were seized when he was arrested. Sheriff Omar Lucio told the Brownsville Herald apparently he was doing this for 2 or 3 years. As to the amount of material, I'm not exactly sure, but it's a large amount. The case never went to trial, however, and the charges against Padron was eventually dropped. Not because he was charged in error, but because the ongoing case backlog allowed the statute of limitations to expire. The backlog has impacted thousands of cases in Cameron County over the years and is still ongoing, according to reports from KRGV News. The district attorney in Cameron County at the time, Armando Villalobos, was later convicted of favoritism, improper influence, personal self-enrichment, self-dealing, concealment, and conflict of interest for his role in a racketeering scheme involving bribery and extortion, and was sentenced to 13 years in prison in 2014. Even though Padron's case was dismissed, his record is still publicly available, and the fact that he was never charged with and found in possession of child pornography should have raised major red flags when he applied for work at a non-profit organization, South Key West. He was hired anyway, and Texas Monthly reports that in his role as a case manager, Padron had direct access to unaccompanied immigrant minors. Padron worked at the Casa Padre shelter in Brownsville, which currently houses more than 1,500 boys between the ages of 10 and 17 years old. Although it's unclear whether he abused or assaulted any of the young children during the employment, there have been a number of reports of child abuse in immigrant shelters across the country, which has increased speculation of the employees who were hired by the shelters. Apparently, Donald Trump has applied an order that now allows kids to be held with their families. I guess you could say that's a modest change. I mean, ultimately, you're still talking about prosecuting and holding people in camps. He is going to run afoul of the law on this. So I don't necessarily know how long he's going to be able to hold these people in concentration camps. That being said, this guy's potentially a pedophile. Or at the very least, he enjoys kiddie porn. Bad move, put him in charge of immigrant kids. Not only are they at the weakest part of the ladder, you have them at the whims of the people who are part of those organizations. Meaning, that kid is under this guy's power of sorts. And you've already established that this guy has a thing for little boys or little girls. And you're putting him in with little boys and little girls in a situation where they're utterly powerless. You had the opportunity to find this record. You didn't find it. And you hired him anyway. Again, I strongly suspect that this is not the only border agent, seeing as there were other issues or other scenarios or other cases where people were talking about either being assaulted or being molested or being abused. The story is gross, but there are consequences. Doing shit like what Donald Trump is doing, and even to some degree what Obama was doing. I mean, holding these kids and separating them from their families. Again, not to the degree that Donald Trump was doing, but the edifice that was put in place was strongly put in place under Obama. Their modus operandi is somewhat the same. This idea of deterrence. Either way, this is consequences. Well, here's a consequence. Pedophiles. They're awesome. I'm going to end this here. How the hell is there a statute of limitation for pedophiles? Well, technically, he never touched anybody. And for the most part, he was watching child porn. And apparently he had a cache of it. We don't know if he actually touched anyone. But again, do you want to take the chance that this guy is hovering around your kid? If you were fleeing a country where there were bloodthirsty tyrants and rapists and drug gangs and all this other stuff, and you're trying to run for your life and you're trying to bring your kid with you, just think about that for a moment. You flee some scenario that's supposed to be terrifying enough that gives an impetus for you to leave that scenario, cross a boundary that's somewhat dangerous in and of itself, and you arrive at the shining city on a hill where they take your kid away from you and potentially hand them over to somebody who has a thing for kids. Amazing. Harold White, exactly, Garden. That was my first concern when I heard about child detention warehouse, pedophile heaven. I think, Garden, I think you and I were talking about the same thing on this. It's the first thing you think of. I don't know how you won't think of that. Ultimately, you're talking about taking somebody's kids away from them and putting them in a power place where they have the least distribution of power, where they're under somebody else who doesn't care, like talking about them. And again, by the way, this is problematic. I mean, think about this. 1,500 immigrant children lost. 1,500 flesh and blood human beings. They're valuable, just like we're valuable. They had parents who loved them, just like your parents loved you. Gone. Handed over and lost. I'm not going to keep this. I have other stories. You're taking people's kids away. Period. Certainly, you had to think that this potentially was going to be an issue. You're taking people's kids away and you're putting them in camps. And you don't necessarily know who the people that are being hired to look after those kids, nor do you know the protocols that are there to make sure those kids are safe. And at least in this case, you've lost track of 1,400 kids. This is a recipe for disaster. That's all I'm saying. All right, I'm going to end this one. Again, not going to keep this one long. I have additional stories. I'm pointing a finger to this because this is fucked up. Like, this is magnificently fucked up. It was fucked up under the last administration. It's more fucked up under this administration. They took an issue with immigration and they exploded it into ridiculous proportions. The zero tolerance thing is obscene. It's utterly obscene. Of all the problems that face this country, the idea that the thing that you need to focus on is the immigrant. It's the immigrant. The problem in this scenario is the one with the least distribution of power. That's the problem in this scenario. Nazis used to behave in this way. All countries that had some demagogue that was put into place, Mussolini, behaved this way. And I'm not necessarily saying Trump is a Nazi or Mussolini. I'm saying he is using a pattern by right-wing demagogues in the way he goes about accruing power. It is nonsense to believe that of all the problems that face this country, that the problem boils down to the immigrant. It's the immigrant. That's the problem. The person with the least distribution of power in this scenario is the problem in this process. They don't make the laws. Nope. They don't give the jobs away. Nope. They don't make the determination when they ship jobs overseas. They don't make the determination how much to pay human beings. They don't make any of these determinations. But they're the problem. So that's the thing that we need to stem. You understand that to some degree the drug market in the United States propagates the drug wars that's taking place in south of the border. Do you also understand that the coups, the political pressures that we've been applying to some of these governments have been assisting in the problems and the chaos that's been taking place in South America that these people are fleeing from? I'm trying to make this point to you that it's not one of those things where South America itself is just screwed up just from the sake of South America being somewhat screwed up, or at the very least they're being trouble spots. Then beyond that particular point, the problems that plague you in this country are not immigration. It's not the immigrants. Donald Trump is completely incapable of dealing with the issues that affect you. It is far easier to point to somebody else and saying, look at that immigrant. Because the fact is, he represents a class that is perfectly better off dividing lower classes that are, for the most part, in the same boat. as opposed to dealing with the real issues of income inequality and economics that plague us. Any real scenario in which he tries to deal with the main issues is going to adversely affect the people who are putting money in his pocket, and the money in his pocket in and of itself. He passed the tax cut that gave over $1 trillion. If you don't look at that and say, oh my God, he told me he wasn't going to give himself any more money. He just gave him and his cronies a bunch of money while putting money or taxes on the backs of me and people like me. Wake up. That's all I'm saying. Wake up. This is not your guy. Look, I understand if some lefties are riding the Trump animal in this idea of beefing up Godzilla to beat King Kong. But Jesus Christ, for the people who are looking at this guy and thinking that this guy is somehow drained in the swamp, you are being had. You're being utterly had. Alright, I'm going to end this. Again, I don't want to keep this one for too long. 16 minutes is way too long for this topic. It was immoral under Obama. It's immoral with some coefficient in front of it under Trump. Still immoral in both cases. Just saying. Alright guys, I'll be back momentarily. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks guys.